Sometimes the smallest mistake isn't a mistake at all. It's the moment fate decides to test your heart. She spilled coffee, lost her job, and thought her world had ended. But when the CEO reviewed the footage that night, he saw something no one else did, and it changed everything. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Between Raindrops Stories. Here, every heartbreak has a reason, and every ending hides a new beginning. It was the kind of morning that carried the smell of rain and panic. Boston streets shimmered wet beneath gray clouds, and inside the glass tower of Whitestone Holdings, people moved like clockwork, sleek suits, fast steps, no wasted motion. Amelia Ross stood in the staff elevator, balancing a tray of coffee cups and trying to breathe through the nerves that had been living in her chest for weeks. Her reflection in the brushed steel door stared back, damp hair pulled into a bun, uniform blouse slightly frayed at the cuffs, and eyes shadowed from too little sleep. 3 months, she told herself. You've made it 3 months. Don't screw it up now. She stepped out onto the 48th floor, the air instantly colder. Everything here gleamed, marble floors, glass walls, the faint scent of eucalyptus and money. This was the executive level, where whispers carried weight and mistakes had consequences. At the front desk, a receptionist with perfect eyeliner smiled too tightly. Conference room, top of the hall. CEO's meeting. Don't spill anything this time, Ross. The words stung, though the woman said them lightly. Amelia forced a polite smile. I won't. What she didn't say was that she hadn't ever spilled anything before. But in this building, you didn't need to mess up to be reminded that you could. She took careful steps down the corridor, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. 5 cups, 2 black, 2 caramel lattes, 1 oat milk cappuccino, the CEO's usual, she'd been told. She rehearsed in her mind what she'd say. Good morning, Mr. Cross. Coffee for the meeting. Simple, polite, quick. The doors to the boardroom loomed tall and heavy, frosted glass hiding the men and women inside. She could hear muffled voices, confident, clipped, belonging to people who didn't worry about rent or late fees. Taking a breath, she nudged the door open with her shoulder. Every head turned. It was like walking into another world. The table long and gleaming, screens lit with graphs and figures, men in expensive watches, women in tailored blazers. At the head of it all sat Daniel Cross, Whitestone's CEO, a man whispered about more than seen. He didn't look up immediately, eyes locked on the tablet in front of him, but even from across the room his presence was palpable. The air bent around him, power wrapped in precision. Coffee delivery for the meeting, Amelia said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. Leave it on the sideboard, he replied, not glancing up. His tone was even, distracted, the kind of used by people who rarely needed to repeat themselves. She moved carefully along the edge of the table, placing the tray near the far end. Just 2 more steps. Just stay calm. That's when it happened. One of the executives, Mark Linton, head of finance, reached across the table for a file, knocking his elbow against the tray's edge. It was the smallest touch, but it was enough. The cups tilted. Time slowed. The rich dark liquid arced through the air and splashed across the table. And on to Daniel Cross's tablet. The sound it made, that sharp splash, seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Amelia froze. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she lunged forward, grabbing napkins, stammering apologies. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. I'll fix it, please. Daniel looked up then. His eyes, cold, sharp gray, met hers. Not furious, not yet, but precise, calculating. The kind of gaze that weighed everything in seconds. Stop. The one word sliced through the room. She stopped, napkins in her hand, trembling. His tone didn't rise, but the temperature in the room dropped. Security will escort you downstairs. You can collect your things from HR. It took a second for the meaning to land. Fired.
The word wasn't said, but it was there, hanging between them, final and merciless. I please, sir, it wasn't." He was already turning away, dabbing the tablet with a cloth one of the executives handed him. "We're done here. Let's continue." And that was it. No one met her eyes as she backed out of the room, cheeks burning, throat tight. Not even the man whose elbow had caused the spill. They all just resumed talking, numbers, projections, strategy, as if she'd never existed. By the time she reached the elevator, her hands were shaking so hard the napkins fluttered to the floor. The receptionist at the desk didn't look at her. No one did. Downstairs, HR was clinical. A woman behind a desk looked up, already expecting her. "Amelia Ross, right? Please sit." It wasn't a request. 15 minutes later, Amelia was standing outside the building in the rain, cardboard box in her hands. Her life condensed. A chipped mug, a photo of her father smiling weakly in a hospital bed, and a notebook half full of job applications she'd never finished. She didn't cry at first. She just stood there, watching the rain soaked through her coat. Then, quietly, she laughed, the kind of hollow laugh that hurts more than tears. She'd worked so hard to climb out of the hole her life had become, taking night shifts at the diner, studying HR courses online, skipping meals to afford rent. For this, for a company that hadn't even let her explain? When the bus finally came, she climbed aboard, box in hand, and took the window seat. The city blurred by in streaks of gray and gold, people rushing to places they belonged, people who mattered. She pressed her forehead to the glass, whispered, "You can do this," the same words written on the sticky note in her box. But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Daniel Cross sat alone in his office as thunder rolled over the city. He wasn't a cruel man, though the world said he was. He was a man of systems, rules, order, efficiency. But something about that girl's face, the sheer shock in her eyes, lingered like static in his chest. He couldn't explain why. So when his assistant, Nora, brought him the board meeting footage to archive, he hesitated before deleting it. Instead, he clicked play. On the screen, he saw it all in perfect detail. The reach, the bump, the spill. Not her fault. He replayed it again, slower. Saw her panic, the way she tried to protect the tablet before herself, the way she apologized even when he'd already dismissed her. Daniel sat back in his chair, jaw tightening. For someone who prided himself on being fair, he'd made a mistake, a big one. He opened her personnel file. Amelia Ross, 27, HR assistant. Started 3 months ago. No prior incidents. Former employment, Silver Diner. St. Anne's hospice volunteer. A small sticky note at the bottom caught his eye, handwritten by her supervisor. Quiet, hard-working, a bit shy, but dependable. He read it twice, then set the file down. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something he didn't have a name for. Not guilt. Something deeper. Something like recognition. Maybe because once, long ago, he'd been in her place, a nobody, doing everything right and still paying for someone else's mistake. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked to the elevator. "Cancel my evening," he told his assistant. "But sir, you have dinner with the investors." "Reschedule." As the elevator doors closed, he caught his reflection. A man in control of everything, except the one thing that mattered most, his own humanity. That night, under the same rain that had followed her home, Daniel Cross went looking for Amelia Ross, not as a CEO seeking to fix a problem, but as a man trying to make something right. He didn't yet know that finding her would change everything, not just for her, but for him.
The city looked different when you weren't looking down from glass towers. For Daniel Cross, that was the first thing he noticed. The rain blurred the glow of neon signs, puddles caught the reflections of tired faces, and the street smelled of roasted chestnuts and damp pavement. Somewhere among all of it lived the woman he had fired that morning, a woman whose name had echoed in his head all day like a quiet accusation, Amelia Ross. He had spent hours after work trying to convince himself that sending an apology through HR would suffice. That's what executives did, delegate compassion the same way they delegated numbers. But something about the footage, about her wise, startled eyes, refused to leave him alone. And so he found himself in a black sedan instead of a boardroom, following an address pulled from her employee file to a narrow street in South Boston. The building was old, red brick, rusted fire escapes, and windows that glowed with the tired light of people just trying to make ends meet. The kind of place Daniel hadn't stepped into since he was a broke intern 15 years ago. He hesitated outside the entrance, umbrella in one hand, guilt in the other. "What are you doing, Cross? This isn't protocol. CEOs don't make house calls." But the truth was, this wasn't about protocol anymore. He climbed the stairs, water dripping from his coat. On the third floor, he found a faded door marked 3B. He raised his hand to knock, then froze as he heard movement inside. A soft voice. A woman's laughter. Faint, but real. Something in him eased. She was okay. He could have turned away right then, told himself that was enough. But before he could, the door opened. Amelia stood there, holding a towel, startled. Her hair was damp, a sweater too big for her shoulders, eyes widening in disbelief as she saw who stood at her door. "Mr. Cross?" Daniel cleared his throat, unsure what to do with his hands. "Miss Ross." She blinked, as if trying to make sense of a ghost. Are you? "I owe you an apology," he said simply. The towel slipped from her hand. "An apology?" "For this morning. You were not at fault. The footage showed what happened. The mistake was mine." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then quietly, she stepped aside. "You'd better come in before my neighbors start recording this." The apartment was small. One room serving as kitchen, living space, and bedroom. Everything was clean, though worn. A second-hand couch, a tiny bookshelf, a photo of an older man on the wall, his eyes kind but tired. "Coffee?" she asked automatically, then flushed. "Sorry, bad choice of offer." He smiled faintly. "Tea's fine." She busied herself at the counter, filling a dented kettle. Daniel watched her move, not with resentment or bitterness, but with quiet dignity. It struck him how easily she carried herself even after everything that had happened. When she handed him the mug, their fingers brushed. He felt the smallest current of something he couldn't name. "Why are you really here, Mr. Cross?" she asked finally. He took a breath. "Because I made a decision too quickly. I saw the spill, not the person. That's on me." Amelia studied him, unsure whether to believe this version of the man who'd dismissed her without a word. "You didn't have to come all the way here to say that. HR emails would have done the trick." "Maybe, but an email doesn't fix what I broke." Her lips twitched. "You didn't break anything, sir. I'm used to things not going my way." Something about the way she said that, soft, almost resigned, cut through him more than anger would have. "You shouldn't be," he said quietly. Silence settled between them. Rain tapped against the window, and somewhere outside a siren wailed. Finally, Amelia leaned back, arms folded. "So what happens now? You reinstate me? Pretend this morning never happened?" "I admit, I want to, but I won't insult you with a gesture that looks like guilt. If you come back, it should be because you want to, not because I feel bad." She tilted her head. "And why would I come back to a place that can fire someone over a cup of coffee?" He smiled faintly. "Because I'm planning to make sure it never happens again." That made her laugh, a soft, disbelieving sound. "You're serious, aren't you?" Painfully. "You see, Miss Ross, I built my company on logic and efficiency, but somewhere along the way I forgot that it's made of people." Her expression softened. "That's surprisingly human of you." "I'm trying to improve. You were the unfortunate catalyst." Her eyes met his, and for the first time she smiled. Small, cautious, but genuine. "You could have just sent flowers, you know? I thought about it, but I didn't know if you liked lilies or apologies better." She chuckled. "Neither, actually. I like sincerity." "Then I'm glad I brought that." The tension eased. They spoke for a while, about her father's illness, about how she'd worked 3 jobs to keep up with hospital bills, about how she once wanted to study psychology but couldn't afford the tuition. Daniel listened, really listened, something he hadn't done in a long time. He told her in return about starting Whitestone in his 20s, sleeping in his car, building something that became too big for its own soul, how success had made him powerful, but also cold. "Sometimes," he said, looking into his cup, "I think I replaced compassion with control. and it took spilling coffee to realize what that cost. Amelia's voice softened. It's never too late to relearn humanity. He smiled at that, a quiet, tired smile that said more than he intended. When he finally stood to leave, she walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cross." "Daniel," he corrected gently. She hesitated. "Thank you, Daniel." As he stepped into the hallway, she added, "For what it's worth, I forgive you, even if you never hire me back." He turned, meeting her gaze one last time. "Then I think that's worth more than the job itself." Their eyes held, and for a moment the rain outside fell softer, as if the world itself was pausing to listen. Back in his car, Daniel sat for a long time, watching the light from her window. Something in him had shifted, quietly but completely. The woman he'd dismissed in seconds had reminded him of something he'd forgotten long ago. That integrity didn't live in offices or boardrooms. It lived in small apartments with peeling paint and people who kept trying even when the world didn't see them. He opened his phone and dialed his assistant. "Nora, I need you to do something." "Yes, sir?" "Find out if Amelia's father is still at St. Anne's Hospice and settle his bills anonymously. All of them." "Understood." "And Nora, if anyone asks, tell them I'm taking tomorrow off." The line went quiet for a moment. "That's the first time you've said that in 6 years, sir." "I know. It's about time I learned how to slow down." Upstairs, Amelia watched the taillights of his car fade into the night. She didn't know what to think. Part of her still wary, another part quietly moved. Maybe, she thought, not every powerful man was heartless. Maybe some of them just forgot how to feel until life forced them to remember. She closed the curtain, wrapped her father's old sweater around her shoulders, and whispered into the quiet apartment, "Maybe this isn't the end after all."
A month passed. The world had gone back to its rhythm, but Amelia's life still felt like it had been quietly rearranged. After that night, she'd expected the CEO to fade back into his glass tower world, a man too important to remember her name twice. But every so often, small, inexplicable things began to happen. First, the hospice had called. Her father's remaining medical bills, gone. Cleared. No explanation, just a note that the balance had been settled. Then, a letter arrived from the local HR certification program she'd applied to months earlier. Her tuition had been approved for a full scholarship, a scholarship she hadn't even applied for. At first, she didn't dare believe it. She looked for fine print, for conditions, for strings attached. There were none. She'd told herself it was just luck, a coincidence, a miracle born of timing. But sometimes, when she passed the skyscraper and saw Whitestone Holdings etched in steel across its face, she couldn't help but wonder. Inside that tower, Daniel Cross was a changed man, though no one around him quite understood why. He still worked long hours, but he stopped barking orders. He started asking questions. Meetings that once began with numbers now began with names. His staff noticed when he walked the lower floors, speaking to receptionists and janitors like they were part of the same world. And in a way, they were. He just never looked closely enough to see it before. He'd also stopped attending the endless dinner circuits and investor galas that had once filled his calendar. Now he went home early, cooked for himself, sometimes even walked home through the rain. When his assistant Nora commented on the change, he only said, "I'm learning to measure profit differently." 2 weeks later, Whitestone announced a charity networking event, a public initiative to support employee education and local small business grants. It was Daniel's idea, though he told the PR team to leave his name out of the spotlight. As it turned out, the event was being held at a new community center downtown, a place Amelia had recently started volunteering at, helping unemployed women with resume writing. It wasn't until she walked into the main hall that afternoon carrying a box of pamphlets that she froze mid-step. Across the room, standing beside the stage, was Daniel Cross. He looked different, less severe, more grounded. No boardroom armor, just a simple charcoal suit and tired eyes that softened when they met hers. For a moment, neither moved. The hum of conversation blurred around them. Then he smiled. "Ms. Ross." She crossed her arms, half laughing. "You have a habit of showing up in the most unexpected places, you know that." "Occupational hazard. I tend to appear where I've made mistakes." "I thought you already fixed those." "Some need revisiting," he said, his voice gentler now. "How have you been?" "Busy. Tired. Trying to rebuild my life one resume at a time." He nodded. "You always struck me as someone who could rebuild from ashes." "Flattery from a CEO? That's dangerous." He smiled faintly. "It's not flattery if it's true." The program started. They stood side by side, listening to speakers take turns thanking the company for its new funding program. At one point, Amelia realized with surprise that one of the sponsorships mentioned was the very scholarship she'd received. She looked at him sideways. He said nothing, just kept his gaze on the stage. When the applause died down, she leaned closer. "You wouldn't happen to know who approved that scholarship, would you?" "Why do you ask?" "Because whoever it was, they signed the letter with initials that happened to match yours." He finally turned to her. "Then I suppose they must be very proud of you." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected softly. "It's different." After the event ended, the sky outside had turned to amber, the kind of early evening light that makes everything look softer. People lingered, chatting and exchanging cards, but Amelia slipped out toward the balcony for air. Daniel followed a few minutes later. She didn't turn when he joined her. She could sense his presence like a change in gravity. "I didn't do it for gratitude," he said quietly. "I know. I did it because I owed you more than an apology. You reminded me that leadership isn't about power, it's about conscience." Amelia looked at him then. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel. You already came back when you didn't have to. That was enough." He studied her, rain beginning to mist across the balcony railing. "You say that like you don't believe it." She hesitated. "Because I don't know what to believe. People like you don't just appear in people like my life. Not without a reason. What if the reason is simple? What if I just wanted to make things right?" She held his gaze. "And what if things were never meant to be right?" For a heartbeat, they stood in silence, the tension between them shifting from confrontation to something gentler, something fragile. Finally, he said, "Then I'll settle for honest." They walked together along the edge of the building, city lights flickering below like tiny fires. She told him about the hospice, about her father's condition improving, about how she'd finally saved enough to start a small online counseling service for people who couldn't afford therapy. He listened quietly, his eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and something else, something more personal. When she finished, she said, "You don't talk much about yourself. Why is that?" "Habit," he admitted. "It's easier to manage silence than explain it." "And what does silence hide?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Loneliness." That word lingered. She turned away, gripping the balcony rail. "I know that one well." He smiled faintly. "I don't doubt it." They stayed like that for a long while. Two people from different worlds, connected by a mistake that somehow became a lifeline. Finally, Daniel said softly, "Would you come back to Whitestone?" She blinked. "You mean reapply?" "No, return, but not as an assistant. I want you to help build our new employee support initiative. You have the empathy this company lacks." She looked stunned. "Are you serious?" "As serious as the man who once fired you over coffee." She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that caught himself by surprise. "You know that's not an easy yes, right?" "I don't expect easy, only honest." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." As they parted, rain began to fall. Light, steady, cleansing. Daniel offered his umbrella. She shook her head. "Keep it. You look like the type who doesn't do well in the rain." "And you?" "I've lived through worse storms." He smiled, watching her disappear into the golden glow of the streetlights. That night, back in her apartment, Amelia sat at her small desk and stared at the offer letter he'd emailed an hour later. Not a contract, a simple note. No titles, no expectations. Just a chance to build something that helps people, including us. .dc. She read it 3 times, heart both afraid and curious. For the first time in a long while, the fear didn't feel like warning. It felt like the beginning of something real. She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe second chances really do exist." Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, not as a threat, but as a promise. The following weeks passed in quiet transformation. Amelia accepted Daniel's offer, though not without hesitation. She didn't want favors. She wanted purpose, a way to rebuild without feeling like a charity case. Daniel respected that. He gave her complete control of the new Employee Renewal Initiative, a program aimed at supporting staff going through personal hardship. He told her, You're the heart of this project. Teach us how to care better." And she did. Within weeks, the mood at Whitestone Holdings began to shift. HR departments were retrained to emphasize empathy. New mentorship opportunities opened for entry-level employees. The same halls that had once whispered judgment now hummed with something gentler: gratitude. What no one knew was that behind every change stood a woman who had once been fired for spilling coffee and a man learning to be human again. The first crack appeared 3 months later. Emilian was in a meeting when she overheard two executives whispering outside the glass wall. "Can you believe Cross hired her back?" More like kept her close. "Have you seen them together? There's something there." Their laughter faded down the hall, but the words stayed. She wanted to ignore it, but gossip spreads like smoke, and soon she could feel the shift in the air, the glances, the polite smiles that didn't reach eyes. One afternoon, her direct supervisor, Karen Holt, called her in. "Close the door, Amelia," she said. Amelia obeyed, her stomach tightening. Karen's tone was cool but not unkind. "I've been asked to review your hiring file. There are questions about your reinstatement. No HR documentation, no formal approval process. Can you explain how that happened?" Amelia swallowed hard. "Mr. Cross asked me to return. I assumed the paperwork would follow." I see. Well, some in senior management are concerned about the optics. Rumors, you understand." "Rumors?" Karen hesitated. "That your relationship with the CEO might be personal?" The words hit like a slap. "That's not true," Amelia said, her voice trembling with anger and humiliation. "He's my boss, that's all." Karen sighed. "I believe you, but this company runs on perception. If someone decides to push this narrative, it could become a problem for both of you." That evening, she stormed into Daniel's office, barely waiting for permission before speaking. "Did you know people are saying I slept my way back into this job?" He looked up sharply from his desk. "What?" "Karen called me in today. Apparently HR's reviewing my hiring process because it wasn't formal enough." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's absurd. I authorized it personally." "Exactly, which is the problem. You made it look like favoritism." He stood, voice low but firm. "I made a decision based on merit. You earned your place here." She laughed humorlessly. "To you, maybe. To everyone else, I'm just the charity case you took pity on." "Amelia, that's not fair. What's not fair is me working my heart out every day just to be a rumor again." He moved around the desk, lowering his voice. "You're not a rumor. You're the reason this company is finally worth believing in." She met his eyes, anger fading into something softer. Hurt, confusion, maybe something else. "Then why does it still feel like I don't belong here?" He took a breath. "Because people fear what they don't understand. Let me handle it." "I don't need saving, Daniel," she said quietly. "I just needed a chance, not a spotlight." She turned and walked out before he could respond. The next morning, the headlines hit. Whitestone CEO accused of nepotism in employee reinstatement scandal. Below the headline, a grainy photo of Daniel and Amelia on the balcony at the charity event, standing too close, smiling. The caption read, "Sources claim the CEO's personal involvement in HR appointments raises ethical questions." By noon, the board had called an emergency meeting. Daniel faced the long table of shareholders and executives. The air was thick with judgment. "Mr. Cross," the chairman began, "is it true you reinstated Ms. Ross without board or HR approval?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Were you aware this could be construed as favoritism or conflict of interest?" "I was aware it could be misinterpreted. I wasn't aware compassion now required committee approval." A murmur rippled through the room. The chairman leaned forward. "Daniel, the issue isn't compassion, it's governance. You've compromised company policy and the press is calling for accountability." Daniel's voice hardened. "Then let them call. I'll answer. Are you admitting to a personal relationship with Ms. Ross?" Daniel hesitated for the briefest second, long enough for the room to seize on it. "No," he said finally, "but I won't apologize for caring about someone who reminded me this company has a soul." The meeting ended in uproar. By the time Daniel returned to his office, the world had already begun spinning its own story.
one that painted him as a man undone by sentiment and her as a woman who'd climbed too far on borrowed kindness. Amelia found out hours later when her phone exploded with messages. Her face was everywhere, in headlines, on feeds, even trending hashtags. She read the words CEO's lover, unethical rehiring, romantic scandal, until her chest physically hurt. By evening, reporters were waiting outside her building. Daniel called twice, she didn't answer. By the third call, she finally picked up, voice breaking. "You shouldn't have helped me, Daniel. You should have just let me go that day." "Amelia, listen to me. I told you I didn't want to be a charity case. Now that's all anyone sees. It's a lie. I'll fix this." "You can't fix what people already believe." Her voice cracked, and before he could say another word, she hung up. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross didn't go home that night. He stayed in his office long after the lights went out, staring at the rain streaking down the window. He'd built empires out of logic, conquered markets with strategy, but when it came to something human, he'd lost everything in silence. Nora entered quietly, setting down a cup of coffee. "Sir, you can still fight this." He shook his head. "There's no PR fix for truth twisted out of kindness." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done at the start. Take responsibility." The next morning, Daniel called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stepped onto the stage, his expression calm but unflinching. "I've seen the headlines, and for once they're right about one thing. I did break company protocol. I reinstated an employee without formal approval. I did it because firing her was a mistake. I did it because compassion shouldn't require committee approval." He paused, scanning the sea of flashing lights. "Miss Ross did nothing wrong. If anyone deserves blame, it's me. And if accountability means stepping down, then that's what I'll do." Gasps rippled through the room, questions erupted, but he walked off the stage before answering any. That night, his resignation email went public. Amelia saw it on her phone while riding the bus home. The article headline read, "Daniel Cross steps down, defends former employee in emotional address." The photo beneath it, Daniel walking away from the podium, rain pouring outside. She read his quote 3 times. "She taught me that kindness isn't weakness. It's courage in its purest form." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her forehead against the cold bus window, whispering to herself, "You idiot. You didn't deserve what they did to you. But you did what I never could. You stood up for me. Thank you." But deep down, a quiet voice replied, "He didn't fall because of you. He fell because of what he reminded him to be." That night, Daniel's penthouse was empty, save for the faint hum of the city below. He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. Instead, he stared out at the skyline that no longer looked like victory. He'd lost his company. He lost her trust. And yet, for the first time in his life, he didn't feel hollow. Because somewhere in that loss, he'd found something truer, the kind of integrity that couldn't be bought back. In another corner of the city, Amelia sat at her desk, fingers hovering over her phone. For hours she debated what to write. Finally, she typed a single message. "You didn't deserve what they did to you, but you did what I never could. You stood up for me. Thank you." She hesitated, then hit send. Outside, thunder rolled again, not a storm this time, but the sound of something cleansing the air, making space for the calm that would follow.
3 months had passed since Daniel Cross walked away from Whitestone Holdings. In the world of billionaires, 3 months might as well be a lifetime. The media had moved on, the board had installed a new CEO, and his name had faded from headlines, but not from memory. He'd sold his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, donated most of the payout from his shares, and moved into a modest apartment above an independent bookstore downtown. For the first time in years, he woke up without a calendar dictating his worth. At first, the silence had been deafening. Then it became peaceful. And eventually, it became home. He started volunteering, quietly, without the press. He helped local entrepreneurs with small business planning, mentoring kids from underprivileged schools on weekends. He still checked the news occasionally, just enough to know that the programs Amelia had built at Whitestone hadn't been dismantled. They were thriving, expanding. Her name came up often now, Director of Employee Renewal, keynote speaker, advocate for workplace empathy. She'd become everything she knew she could be. And he'd stayed away. Because for all the words left unsaid between them, Daniel understood something now. Sometimes love isn't about possession, it's about protection. He'd already taken enough from her reputation, he wouldn't risk taking her peace too. Amelia, meanwhile, had found her rhythm again. Work was busy, fulfilling even, but it wasn't the same kind of busy that used to exhaust her. This work had purpose. The new CEO had reached out after Daniel's resignation to offer her full independence in running the initiative. It was his condition, the man had admitted awkwardly. He said if he was stepping down, he wanted to ensure you had everything you needed to continue. She hadn't cried then. She'd waited until she got home, set down her bag, and finally let the tears come, not of sadness, but of something more complicated. Gratitude. Guilt. Love that hadn't been allowed to bloom. Every time she saw his quote in the framed article on her office wall, she felt it all over again. Sometimes she still looked out the window at night and imagined him standing somewhere in the city, looking at the same rain. It was early November when their paths crossed again. Amelia was invited to speak at a small community entrepreneurship event, a modest affair held in a converted warehouse downtown. She almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her thing. But something about the cause resonated with her, helping rebuild small businesses affected by layoffs and closures. Halfway through her talk, as she looked out into the small audience, she froze. There he was. Sitting quietly in the back row, wearing a simple gray sweater, jeans, and that same unreadable calm that used to command boardrooms. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. It was enough. Her breath caught, but she didn't stumble. She finished her talk, thanked the crowd, and pretended she didn't feel the ground shift beneath her. When the applause faded and the hall began to empty, he stayed seated, waiting. Amelia gathered her papers, walked to him slowly, and said the only thing that made sense. "You came." Daniel stood, his smile soft but unsure. "I wasn't sure if I should." "You shouldn't have to ask." Then, after a pause, "But I'm glad you did." They stood there awkwardly, two people who had once shared everything and now didn't know where to start. Finally, she broke the silence. "You look normal." He laughed, that deep, genuine laugh she hadn't realized she'd missed. "I've been told poverty's very grounding." She smiled. "You're not poor." "No," he admitted. "But I am, finally, content." They walked outside together. The city had started to glow under the orange shoe of streetlights, the air sharp with the promise of winter. "Do you miss it? The power, the title?" He shook his head. "I thought I would, but it turns out I don't miss owning things. I miss meaning something." She glanced at him. "You still do. You just can't see it." He stopped walking. "You really believe that?" She nodded. "You didn't lose yourself, Daniel. You found the part you were missing." They stood at the corner, waiting for the light to change. Across the street, a coffee shop glowed warm through its windows. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and fogged glass. Daniel smiled faintly. "Coffee?" She hesitated. "You sure that's a safe choice for us?" He chuckled. "I'll take the risk." The shop was quiet, nearly empty. They took a corner booth, and for a while they said nothing. Just the sound of clinking cups and soft jazz filled the air. Finally, Amelia spoke. "You know, the day you fired me, I thought my life was over. But if you hadn't, I wouldn't be here. None of this would have happened." He nodded. "I thought about that a lot, how one mistake turned into everything." "You mean how you fired me and then became my biggest problem," she teased lightly. He smirked. "I prefer to think of it as your reluctant supporter." Her eyes softened. "You were never reluctant. You just didn't know how to care without fixing." "And you taught me that sometimes caring means letting people fight their own battles," he said quietly. A silence settled again, heavier this time, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, he reached across the table. "I don't expect forgiveness, but if there's a way back to your trust, I'll spend as long as it takes finding it." She looked at his hand for a long moment, before placing hers over it. "Daniel, you already did. You just never noticed."
Outside, snow had started to fall. Light, hesitant flakes, catching the glow of passing headlights. They left the cafe and walked side by side down the quiet street, the sound of their footsteps soft against the dusting of white. At a crosswalk, Amelia turned to him. "So what now? What does Daniel Cross do when he's not saving companies or getting himself in trouble for being too kind?" He smiled. "Maybe I start something small, something that doesn't need a board to tell me what's right." "Like what?" "Something with purpose, maybe a foundation to support people like you. People who fall through the cracks but keep standing anyway." She smiled. "You'd be good at that." "You'd be better," he said, his voice low. "Are you trying to hire me again?" "Maybe I'm trying to find a reason to see you again," he smiled gently. Her heart caught. "You don't need a reason." He looked at her then, eyes warm and certain. "No, but I'd like to earn one." They stood under a streetlight, snow drifting between them. He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and said softly, "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For making me human again." She smiled, eyes glistening. "And you made me brave." The city noise faded. For a heartbeat there was only the sound of falling snow, the kind that feels like forgiveness. And then, without pretense, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or grand. It was simple, real. The kind of kiss that didn't need promises, because it already held one. Weeks later, they stood together in the same coffee shop where they'd first met, but this time, no suits, no boardrooms, just two people who had survived the storm and found calm in each other. Daniel was pouring coffee behind the counter, laughing as Amelia teased him for spilling again. "Some habits never change," she said. He handed her a cup, grinning. Maybe some are worth keeping. The bell over the door chimed as a gust of cold air swept in. Outside, the world moved on, unaware that inside the small corner of the city, two lives had come full circle. Amelia looked at him, warmth in her eyes. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "It all started with coffee and a mistake." Daniel smiled, setting down his cup. "No," he said softly. "It started with a second chance."
Sometimes the smallest mistakes change the biggest parts of our lives. A wrong judgment, a spilled cup of coffee, a second chance that becomes the start of everything new. Daniel and Amelia's story wasn't about falling in love, it was about rising through loss, about finding forgiveness in unexpected places, and realizing that kindness, even when misunderstood, always finds its way home. Because sometimes what looks like the end is just life gently redirecting you toward what's meant to stay. So, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to leave a heart in the comments. Tell us, do you believe second chances find us when we need them most? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Between Raindrops Stories for more emotional tales of love, loss, and the quiet miracles that change lives forever.